Okay. Good evening, everybody. This is Deanna Minich. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm here to talk with you about Body Beautiful. So we are going to be talking about all the foods that help to promote inner health and an outer glow. And so this webinar is done on behalf of Harmony Hill Retreat Center, which is in Union, Washington, and they sponsor incredible cancer retreats. And as part of those retreats, I get to talk with everybody about nutrition. And so they're extending on the education in nutrition by offering these webinars to you. So this evening, we're going to talk about how do we tap into really going within inside of our bodies in order to tap into that sense of vitality. So just a general disclaimer on the presentation. This is more educational and this is not prescriptive. So make sure that if there's anything here that interests you, that you check in with your own physician or healthcare provider and follow up with them specifically. So first, let's talk a little bit about the idea of aging. I know in some way it's probably on everybody's mind, at least a little bit. And I really like this quote from U.B. Blake on his 100th birthday. He said, "If I'd known I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself." I think it's a very pivotal quote because many times we're not thinking in the moment always about our longevity or the quality of life that we hope to have into our later decades. And so this webinar is really the impetus, the catalyst for you to really become inspired and sparked to make some changes. And quite honestly, based on what I've seen in the literature and just through my meeting with people and patients, it's truly never too late. Now, that doesn't mean that you necessarily want to wait until the last minute, but it's very important to, when you are committed, to really be in that mode of commitment and to move forward and really adopt these changes and to make them part of your life. So we know that aging is not avoidable, but you can surely optimize your process. So obviously we all have certain genes that allow us to do certain things within our body and control certain behaviors, and there's some degree of bandwidth or wiggle room there that allows us to optimize the expression of those genes. You know, this idea that we're locked into our DNA is really old, and it's very 20th century. And in the 21st century, ever since we decoded the genome, I think that we've really gone into the whole place of the potential of our DNA and where we can go based on our lifestyle choices. So I like the idea that there's hope. So what does perfect health look like? You know, many times I think we focus so much on disease and we don't focus on what is health. So perfect health, and I like this definition, it's a very simple one, but it comes from traditional medicine. It comes from Chinese medicine. And what they state here, according to a traditional Chinese medicine textbook, is that if the person has spirit, the complexion is healthy, and we all know what that looks like. The muscles are firm, and I think that we can all recognize that to some degree. The face color is clear. The eyes have glitter and reveal inner vitality. The mind is clear, and the breathing even. Now, all of these qualities don't really require that you have complicated diagnostics. Probably the most complicated it gets is to have a mirror, because you can certainly see how you feel in your skin. And many times the feeling that we have really generates the kind of body that we in turn have. And day in and day out, we become what we have felt and thought and how we've acted. So all of these qualities I think are key, and I really like this person that I have on the screen because to me, he really does represent that sense of vitality. And we can say, well, gosh, you know, he has wrinkles or, you know, maybe doesn't have all of his hair, but look at the expression on his face. The spirit is there, the joy in his eyes, the idea that he's active and swimming, you know, really having this state of functionality is also something that we think about into our later years. How functional are we, or are we debilitated and bedridden? So truly, perfect health is our natural state of being, and who doesn't want to be in the state of where we're in our 90s and even 100s. You know, I was just talking with somebody the other day, and he was talking about how his mother was celebrating her 99th birthday, and how she was going to the mall and being with friends, and you know, that's really a wonderful state to be in. And I mentioned to him, I said, well, it sounds like you have good genes and good choices in your family, and he said, well, for him it's going to be 120. So, you know, definitely the optimal way to really progress through our lives, I can imagine for many people, is to live our fullest potential and then just one night go and pass away in our sleep without really having the debilitation of a chronic disease or being in pain or not being functional. So the question is, how do we get to that state? There's been research on it. I'm sure you've heard of the blue zones. If you haven't, there's a great book called The Blue Zones. It's by Dan Buettner. And essentially he did this very thing where he looked all throughout the planet to see where are there populations that live to 100 or greater. And what he found is that there were 9 qualities of the different pockets on the planet where people were living to 100 and greater. And by the way, that's called a centenarian, somebody who lives to 100 and older. We don't have too many of them, but they are out there, and we see them in certain parts of Europe, we see them in Asia, and we even see them in the United States. There are these clusters. So what he found in his research is that it was very important for people to move naturally, not the kind of stress-filled exercise where we don't do anything all day and then we go to the gym and we work ourselves very hard and we sweat, and you know, sometimes that could be very stressful on the body, especially if we're not trained. So these folks were moving naturally throughout the day. They were in their gardens. They were riding their bikes to work. I remember I did that when I lived in the Netherlands. I was doing my PhD, and for 4 years of my life I had no car. And everybody in the Netherlands rides bikes. And so there are even bike lights, bike stop lights. And it was so refreshing because you get to work and you just feel like, oh gosh, I don't have to think about going to work out, because my workout was it was very integrated into my day. So moving naturally is really important. Hara hachi bu, or eating until you're no longer full, or I'm sorry, no longer hungry. So we get to this point of really this comfortable fullness or satiation. You know, it's not to the point of distension where we feel uncomfortable. It's really a comfortable place of feeling satisfied with our food. And when we go overboard, this is where we start to see things like our mitochondria, our organs of vitality in our cells, start to die off. We start to become less energized when we overeat, and this is becoming more and more recognized. Plant slant. The more plants we eat, the better off we're going to be overall. We need a variety of plants. We're going to go into that much more as we talk about the foods. Grapes of life are also in there. We're going to talk about that too. And what this means exactly is that there are certain medicinal beverages, things like a dark red wine or a steeped green tea, or even a very hoppy beer, a dark hoppy beer, which all have medicinal components to them and can help with the mechanisms of aging. Purpose. Purpose is a big deal when it comes to living long. And in fact, you know, this sets our mental template. If we have a sense of purpose, then everything else falls in line. Probably we're going to make the best choices for ourselves in that moment, whether it's how we're eating, how we're living, how we're behaving, because we have that sense of purpose. Everything is tethered to purpose. And when we have that, we feel like we have direction. It makes us want to get out of bed in the morning. Downshift. This is another way of saying to release stress. And stress means a lot of things to a lot of people. And, you know, it's not that we don't need any stress. We need a little bit of stress, but we don't need chronic, overwhelming stress. That's what ages us and wears us down. Belong. I love this. This is the whole idea of community, that when we find our tribe and feel like we belong to something greater, and we truly do, we're, you know, as a species, human beings are very interdependent. We always think we can be independent and off on our own, but at the end of the day, we are all very connected energetically and physically, and even the science is showing us that our behaviors, who we're connected to, will determine so much of who we are. Loved ones first. So this is putting family first, having a sense of your priorities, and also having, again, that very close-knit support network, which is so important for creating that fabric of support, loyalty, dedication, and really having that cushion. And then finally, right tribe, which kind of ties into the belong. We can belong to a lot of different groups, but are those the right groups for us? And the tribe that we're associating with, how do they change our behaviors in a positive way? So sometimes we might have to shift, whether it's friendships or circles or groups that we belong to, because it may not just feel like it is cohesive and connected to who we are. So we have to determine our points of authenticity and then find where we need to be. So looking further, you know, if you look at the medical way of determining whether or not we're healthy and vital and our bodies are beautiful, it's looking at our stature, it's looking at our skin, it's a lot of things that are on the outside. Something as basic as our body weight, because when we're overweight, we are inflamed, and inflammation is part of the bedrock of chronic disease. Even looking at normal body processes, you know, I always find it very interesting how whenever I ask people about their bowel movements, how they think that it's normal to have a bowel movement every other day or every third day or maybe once a week. So sometimes we get a skewed sense of what is normal. And what that looks like, or even women that have their menstrual cycles and they think it's normal to have severe cramps or to get headaches or to be moody, and you know, just kind of saying, well, it's just PMS, and you know, we're used to PMS and that's just what it means to be a woman. Well, maybe not, and maybe that's a belief that we're hanging on to that's creating and adding to our behaviors that are leading to that physiology. So that's something to think about. And even just bodily secretions. What about how you smell? And all the aspects of how you smell, right? The sweat, the urine, the feces, menstrual blood, saliva. Does your breath smell? And I know a lot of these topics are kind of like, ooh, I don't even like to think about these things she's talking about. But you know what? They're all indicators of how well we are aging and how vital we are. The other ones to think about it would be appetite. A lot of people's appetite gets skewed. They stop eating breakfast. They stop eating throughout the day. They start binging at night. In fact, there's even this whole syndrome called nighttime eating syndrome. So we're changing our eating patterns. We're not synced up with the circadian rhythm of nature. And this is a big deal for our gut. It's a big deal for our brain. So when those things are out of alignment, our sleeping starts to change, our rhythms start to change, our metabolism becomes not so strong, and we're just out of sync. So that's why flowing with the seasons can be so remarkable and so impactful on our physiology, right? Sleeping a little bit longer when we need to, and kind of going with the diurnal pattern of where we're at in the seasons. Even looking at emotions, our mind, you know, one of the first things that people start to complain about is their cognition. Oh my goodness, you know, I don't feel that sense of mental sharpness. I'm not remembering things. I'm forgetting where I put my keys. And so, you know, things like that can start to creep in. And that's one of the things that is completely flexible and plastic. We can really keep our cognition. And I know people like this. In their 80s and 90s, they're incredibly sharp. And I always look to them thinking, I'm going to be that. You know, you kind of focus on, you know, what are your role models? Where do you want to be? And start to vision that. Because if you don't vision it, then you're just the sum of the individual choices without really, again, connecting that to a larger vision. Now, if you go to the doctor and you get some of your lab biomarkers done to look at your vitality, which connects to that sense of beauty, there are different markers in the blood, things that look at your inflammatory processes. So there are different things that your doc can look at, like HSCRP, which is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. You can look at your vitamin D. They can look at your blood sugar, your insulin. They can look at your fatty acid levels. They can look at what's called hemoglobin A1C. To me, that's a huge marker of aging. It tells me how well your body is responding to the foods that you're taking in, especially sugar, and that's over the longer term. And just even doing some simple things like looking at your body weight and the amount of inches or centimeters of your waist. That right there says a lot. So, you know, many times we watch television and we see makeovers and we see people go from, you know, good to amazing. And, you know, it's always a wow experience. And, you know, many times we don't really pay attention to the opposite, right? Because we wouldn't want to. That's an uncomfortable flow rather than looking at people improving, you know, really looking at people that aren't maybe looking so good. But it can really happen, and it can happen in a short period of time depending on what we're going through, right? And so really seeing that transition, depending on the stressors and the things around us, it can really play a huge role. In fact, I like to tell the story of my father. My father is an identical twin, and really and truly, you only know how well you're aging if you have an identical twin, because you don't know what you would have been like unless you have a control, right? I mean, you don't know if you made certain choices, where you would have been. So I always like to tell this story. So my father's name is John, and his brother's name is Jim, J&J. And when they were very small, they looked identical. In fact, even in this picture right here, I can't really tell which one is which. I could start to probe and start looking at their features a little bit more, but quite honestly, even though one of them is my father, I couldn't tell you which one he is. When they were in high school, they looked, and I have here their yearbook picture. They are side by side, looking very similar again. In fact, they look so similar in high school that, well, now it's way long gone and decades have passed, but they used to switch classes. You know, my uncle was really good at math and science, and my dad was better at reading and literature, more the right brain, and my uncle more the left brain. So they would actually switch classes. They switched dates. They did everything. They had lots of fun when they were teens because they looked so similar. Well, they went on to live different lives. And my uncle, being more the left brain, he became the engineer. And, you know, he got a desk job and worked for many big name laboratories and did a lot of scientific work. And my dad, he was more the common sense guy, and he became a policeman. And so they had very different lives. They both had the same amount of kids. They both had 3 children each. But they ended up looking very different as they got older. So this is me in the middle of both of them. My dad is actually the one on the left, and my uncle is the one on the right. And you can kind of see that, you know, they've aged differently. They don't really look their identical selves. You know, I won't make any comments either way, but you can see how life can really change our experiences, right, in terms of who we are epigenetically. So, yes, just some things to note there, because as we start talking about the foods, we're going to be looking at foods that will help us with these processes, right? We'll start to look at how do foods change our ability to be beautiful. And by the way, it's not just foods that allow us to be beautiful. It's really about a mindset too. I remember, and even now, you know, when I meet people, it's really their attitude. When I first meet them, and if they are enthusiastic and they're passionate, it's almost like everything else, that's all you see, is really this sense of vitality that comes through who they are as a person. And oftentimes, you know, how we look on the outside kind of whittles away because they have such a sense of presence and such a sense of purpose. But of course, our physical appearance does tie into that. All right, so how do we get our vitality back if we feel like we've lost it? And again, it is possible. We know the story of Stomatis Moritis, who at the age of 65 was told he had pancreatic cancer, who had 6 months to live, and now here he is in this picture at the age of 97, far outweighed his doctor's prediction that he would just live a couple of months, and he went into a different lifestyle, went back to his homeland, Icaria, and lived a different life. There's also the example of Dr. Terry Walls. If you don't know who she is, she writes all about vitality. In fact, many of the things I'm going to present to you tonight really come from her work on mitochondria. She's a physician who had multiple sclerosis. That's what you see on the left. She's debilitated. She was in a wheelchair. Tried to figure out, how does she get well? How does she change her life? And she did it primarily through food. I've interviewed her, talked with her. I see her at medical conferences. She's a fabulous woman. And as you can see on the right, after just 1 year of therapeutic intervention with food, she transformed her life and was now more than functional. She was riding her bike, and just talked with her about a month ago. She gives talks. She gives inspirational, motivational talks based on this experience. So it is possible. So let's dive into the food. We know that food can change our DNA. If we really want to alter our sense of beauty within, we need to speak to the DNA. If we're just talking kind of on the outside, on the fringe, the cell membranes, that's good. But when we get to the heart of our DNA, that's where we want the change to happen. And we know that the environment, whether it's toxins, UV, chemicals, things we eat, can cause DNA damage. And the beauty of this is that we can alter it. Overall, if we don't do anything to correct it, what the studies show is that DNA damage, and that's what these two panels are showing, is that DNA damage gets worse with age, just naturally. If we're not doing anything about it, our bodies don't function as well, they don't repair as well, we're going to have issues. But what the studies have also shown is just small amounts of even B vitamins, and really small amounts, in some cases relatively insignificant amounts, especially of vitamin B12, can help to reverse that process and help to give us more stability when it comes to our genome. So let's look at what we eat and how important that is, because I really do truly believe that you can start the process of beauty and vitality within just with your next meal. It's really true. The decisions that you're going to make from here on out will determine how you're talking to your DNA. So the energy of that experience too, I think we get so static in our view of food. We start to distill down into looking at calories and protein, and is she going to tell me how much fat I need or how much protein? Well, that's one part of the side of information, but then there's also the other side of food, looking at the energetics of food, right? That there is energy that we get from food in the way of calories, and then there's also energy that we get on a much finer level. And if you were taking a quantum physics class at the university, or really looking at the fine particles in food, you would see that we're going to have different resonances at the physics level versus the biological level, which is usually where we go when it comes to food. So the question is, how much energy do you get from certain foods? Yes, I'm going to talk about certain foods, but you have to assess for yourself how much energy you get from eating itself. Because I can eat a salad and perhaps I feel great. I feel energized afterwards. You might eat this salad and you may not feel so energized. So you have to be really body aware if you want to be body beautiful, because just going with a blind prescription on foods is not going to really be everything. And really to keep your energy high as well. And what do I mean by energy? I mean attitude. I mean awareness, because all of those things are going to ripple on into our choices. And you're going to make better choices when it comes to your food. So good energy plus good food choices is going to give you the best in the way of your vitality. It really, truly is. And when we change how we eat, we're going to change all these different aspects of who we are. And it's the law of attraction. You're just going to start pulling into your life. When you feel more vital, you're going to be pulling in more vitality. You're going to be meeting more people that are vital, drawing you to experiences that are going to create more vitality in you. So there really, truly is something, again, to think about the vibration of food. And this is where people ask me all the time, do I eat raw food, cooked food, etc. Looking at, we're going to talk about this a little bit more too, the the preparation of food. But one principle I want you to keep in mind, no matter what food we start talking about, is that really and truly my mantra is always eat the energy that you want to become. You know, would you really like to be eating fried, burnt, overcooked food that has no life force? Is that really what you want to become? Ask yourself that question. Look at food symbolically. Do you want to eat a vibrant, let's just go back with the salad example, a vibrant salad, then what kind of energy does that give you versus a plate filled with overcooked food? You know, just look at that. Just look at it symbolically. Which one do you want to become? Because you will become it. That food becomes you. That's what you're doing through the process of eating. I love Masaru Emoto's work, a Japanese PhD researcher, who essentially showed that applying certain words to foods changed even how rapid the food decayed. So he took cooked rice and he put on one of the jars of the cooked rice, you fool, and then on the other one he put thank you. And believe it or not, and maybe try this at home, it's an easy experiment to do, the jar of rice that had you fool on it decayed at a faster rate than the one that had thank you. So keep in mind your intention when you're eating. What is your intention? I developed a whole card deck called Nourish Your Whole Self, which is all about creating intention at the meal. Picking a card, having the phrase, seeing a beautiful image, and having that as your intention as you're eating, right? Whether you want to say a prayer, you make you have a word, whatever it is, that right there creates the path to that vitality. So foods that have a low energy vibration, that are aging, that are not so beautiful, are going to be foods that are overcooked. Leftovers, the more, I know it's so convenient to eat leftovers, but just look at leftovers. The color usually changes. Yeah, they might still be tasty, but not in the same fresh way. They start to decay, and then you take in that decay. Burning of foods, you know, things that are char grilled, they're actually black and crisp, not so good. Foods that are over-processed, foods that smell bad, they're oxidized, you know, using oxidized fats, all of that is very pro-aging. So if we can think of all those foods and what they would look like on your plate, they might look something like this. This is what I call a high-aging, low-beauty way of eating. So as some of you may even know, I really like to focus on the whole self of who you are. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at beauty and vitality, or we're looking at diabetes, or we're looking at obesity, whatever it is, we really have many points of entry to look at with the body. So let's dive into this through color. And one of the, if you take nothing else away from this talk other than what I'm going to say right now, I'd be really happy. And that is, in order to be radiant, you need to eat colors. Colors in a variety of different colors, that we get different vibrations, we get different nutrients, we get different pigments and phytonutrients from the different plants. And I think that no matter your eating style, I don't care if you're paleo or you are a vegan, we can all meet on plants. All of us can eat plants of some type. And you've got lots of choices out there, everything from fruits to spices. Most people just aren't getting enough when it comes to color, right? And so let's dive into each of these individual sections, and let's focus on red. Let's focus on red, and when I think of red, I think of lots of different red foods. And you know what's interesting is that many times we're in a rut with foods. You know, we're not really engaged with variety. And so you might be thinking to yourself, looking at this list, of course, I have red foods. I have tomatoes. Well, tomatoes are great. They have a number of different nutrients, but they don't have everything. So the more complex of an array you can include, the better that is for your body, for your processes of aging. Pomegranates, great for the liver. Raspberries, also great for the liver. Strawberries contain a compound which just help your body to protect itself from DNA damage. We look at things like the fiber in red apples. Hopefully you're washing your apples well and eating the skin, because otherwise you're missing a lot of polyphenols, which are very protective. So really important to be eating these rooty red foods. They do contain a number of different phytonutrients. I'm not going to take you through all of them, but just note that since we're talking with, this is on behalf of Harmony Hill, we're thinking about cancer, a lot of these compounds are protective and very anti-cancer, very protective against cancer. So tomatoes, yes. Not everybody can do tomatoes. Let me just be upfront about this. There are certain classes of foods called nightshades that maybe not everybody connects to because they get symptoms or they're too acid, and these are like the tomatoes and the eggplants, the bell peppers, and paprika of multiple types. So, you have to decide, are you somebody that can do tomatoes? If you can, that's great, because it is a high vitality food if you can. There are a number of studies looking at lycopene, which is a compound in it that's very protective for things like the prostate, also for the cardiovascular system and the immune system. As we get older, our immune system starts to become less robust. We can't really defend ourselves against invaders, which is why we tend to see many older people getting sick with colds and flus more frequently and not really being able to recover with that same bounce back. So that's part of vitality, is working on our immune system. With lycopene, definitely what they have seen, even in large studies, thousands and thousands of people, is protection against one of the biggest killers in the Western world, which is cardiovascular disease. And we know that it's part of the Mediterranean diet. When it comes to apples, I always love this. It's the red. There are differences between the different types of apples and what you can extract when it comes to phytonutrients. So the smaller the apple, typically the more dense it is in these phytonutrients that are protective. So of course, who wants to eat a crab apple? That's super sour and not that tasty. But what makes it so sour is these phytonutrients, which you're getting a lot of if you look at the middle of that relative to the skin, right, versus a bigger apple where you've got more of the meat inside, which is giving you more of the fibers and less of the phytonutrients on the outside. When I think of roots, I also think of garlic as one of those vitality foods. I mean, look at the Mediterranean and what they're eating. Garlic, when we were just talking about the immune system, right? Garlic is an incredible antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial, antimicrobial substance. And the best way to prepare garlic when you're cooking it is to take apart the cloves and then chop them and let them sit for about 10 minutes. That will help to maximize the anti-cancer properties of garlic before you then toss it into your stir fry for cooking. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind. Varieties. Sometimes we just get stuck thinking of, this kind of on the screen. I have a friend, Diane, who lives in close to where I live. She grows 25 different varieties of garlic. I never even knew that there were so many varieties until I met her. And, they all look a little bit different. Some of them are purple looking and tan, and some of them have a stronger smell than others. And so I would encourage you to explore beyond your standard garlic. Treat yourself to more of a culinary escapade on a Saturday night where you go to a grocery store that may have more ethnic foods, just a wider selection so that you can explore some of these foods. Okay, what about the flow? When I think of orange, I think of fats and oils, I think of tropical fruits, I think of orange foods. And of course, if I were to ask you quickly, what is an orange food, you might think of carrots, right? I think that's kind of our go-to, is we think carrots, beta-carotene, which is great. We might think of the obvious in orange, but there are so many different, and one thing I don't even have on here is kumquats. I was just in the store the other day, and kumquats must be in season because it was at the healthy food store, and they're very small, they're really pungent and very orange. So there are so many choices here that, sure, they can give us carotenoids, but lots of different things like bioflavonoids as well. And I love just the creativity that comes with the color orange, right? It's such a beautiful, brilliant, you know, again, when you're tapping into these colors, don't forget that we feed just through our eyes, through the color, and that can change our psychology, which in turn changes our physiology. Don't forget that, the power of color. There are studies on this, how color impacts us from a mood perspective. And so even think about, and I know I'm going to draw this beyond food a little bit, but think of your house. Think of the walls and the rooms that you spend the most time in. Are those colors that really invigorate you? I know my husband, when we moved into our house, he has his own music room, and he wanted to paint it blue. If I was in a blue room, and it was like a darker blue, if I was in a blue room, I would not like that at all. That would not invigorate me. I need peach and melon and green and purple. I could not be in a blue room. I just know that that would impact my mood. But sometimes, you know, I don't think we pay attention to those things. We don't realize the power because a lot of it is very subconscious. It's the same thing with food. When we're looking at it, it's changing our mood and our psychology. So there are a lot of great orange products. Well, and some of these you're going to say, well, those aren't orange. Well, they contain compounds that are typically found in orange foods. You know, just like the leaves that turn color in the fall, when you've got the green leaf and then it turns red and orange and yellow. Well, underneath a lot of green plants, you have all these colors. You just don't see them. So this gives us the opportunity to see that there is a lot of rainbow variety even in foods that are green. Citrus, when I think of yellow and I think of something happy and vital, I surely think of citrus. And so many opportunities to use lemons, and I'll just extend that over even into limes. We think about oranges. You know, whether we're squeezing lemon juice into water and drinking it, or we're squeezing it onto a stir fry, just the smell alone. And don't forget the aromas of certain foods can change our moods as well. I don't know about you, but when I'm smelling citrus, I just automatically feel happy. It's a very light, you know, it just triggers certain things that I think in our brain alter and then, again, can change our behaviors. So with orange, I think about flowing, right? And I think about fats and oils. And some of the flowing fats that are really incredible for helping us to remain vital and beautiful, part of that is keeping our flow as we get older. The moment we become rigid and stuck and stagnant, we start to get symptoms and disease. When we flow, we almost become ageless. And you can see these people as they're flowing. I know somebody who's 88 years old, she still walks 3 miles a day. You know, that's an example of making sure we get flow, movement. And the way we get movement within our cells and our body is through certain fats called omega-3 fats. And we can get that from salmon. We can get it from a lot of different foods. But these fats are built into our cell membranes, in other words, the little border around our cells. And if we have fluid flowing fats, then things are going to move very seamlessly from cell to cell. That's what this very complicated graphic is showing, is essentially 2 nerve cells talking to each other in the brain. And that communication is going to be much better when we have omega-3 fats in that border of the cell. I love coconut for vitality. Coconut in the oil form gives us very quick burning fats that we can just burn up for energy right away. They can be burned up in our gut. They can be burned up in our liver. They're not absorbed like some of the other long chain fats that we find in animals. If we also think about the skin, coconut, even applied topically, coconut oil that is, can be very good. Also has a lot of great effects, the antiviral, antimicrobial aspects, which are just wonderful. When I'm thinking of orange, I'm also thinking of the whole gamut of herbs and spices, which are phenomenal, successful, healthy aging and vitality substances. Just really dousing your meal with a number of different spices can be great. Like even tonight, I had a curry chicken, you know, just really using curry, and I also use ginger together. When we take turmeric, we can buy curry as a spice, or we can buy turmeric. I use turmeric and ginger together. These are two of the most potent anti-inflammatory spices there are. So really feeling that the heat of those spices, the protection when you're cooking things like meat or even vegetables, adding spices can help to prevent a lot of the cancer causing compounds that form in the presence of heat. And also, curcumin, which is found in turmeric, can help to protect the brain and help to prevent a lot of the neurological decline. So definitely, I always say this when I'm teaching at Harmony Hill, if I was stuck on a desert island and I knew I had to survive, I would need to have turmeric with me. I really believe in it. All right, what about the fire part of us? What about the part of us that is transformative, and we focus on carbohydrate here and yellow foods, and I've already covered yellow foods a little bit already. But really and truly, when I think of the fire within us, you know, we only have so much of a flame. And the flame, we can sometimes turn it up a little bit or turn it down, but, you know, we basically have a set amount of energy that we are provided with. And so either things are going to take away energy from us, or they're going to give us a little bit more energy. And so really figuring out what foods are costing you energy is important. This gets back to the thing I was saying very early on about sensing your vitality after you've eaten a meal. Sometimes when we eat too much, we feel really tired. Why? Well, because that food, that experience just took our energy. It didn't give us energy, at least not in the short term. It just made us more tired. It overloaded our mitochondria, our powerhouses, and so that's not a good thing. Sugar. Sugar is definitely, and I think that this might even be a picture of salt here if I'm looking at the crystals right, but let's imagine this is sugar, and salt is a whole other issue as well. But sugar is very aging, and I do believe it zaps us of vitality. It really robs us of our potential to be beautiful in many ways, because sugar glycates our proteins, which means that as our body gets older, we become less efficient at processing sugar, so we've got more sugar running around in our blood. And then that sugar attaches to our red blood cells, and that's not such a good thing. This is where we start to feel more fatigued, we are more inflamed, and it even looks like there's an association between these complex sugar and protein compounds and chronic diseases. So we don't want sugar within our diet to any great degree, and sugar's everywhere. So looking at sustained forms of carbohydrate, I think with everybody, you know, following different ways of eating, like the paleo approach, I think people have become very carbohydrate phobic, and this is where, you know, I've been in the field long enough to see that we always swing on this pendulum of trends, and, you know, going from high protein, you know, back into some carbohydrate. I was just talking with a nutritionist friend of mine. We were talking about the Okinawan diet, which is actually very carb heavy, but these people that live in Okinawa have they do have longevity. So maybe it's about the quality of carbohydrate. It's not to rule out any one food category. It's let's get our gut in good working order, reduce gluten. Gluten is just a marker typically of poor quality food anyway. And in fact, I'm going to be doing a webinar for Harmony Hill on gluten, so I'll be talking more about it. But, you know, there are certain things in complex carbohydrates that can be useful, like fiber. And no better way to keep our bowels moving than to have enough dietary fiber. So when we think of the fire, I think of the flame that we have in the kitchen. We're cooking our food, how we prepare our food. I've already talked about some of the spices, and not overcooking food. You know, people ask, you know, do I eat raw or do I eat cooked? Well, I kind of think it's something in between. And I think overcooking is not a good thing for many people in many cases. You know, of course, there are things like soups, which that's appropriate under certain conditions, but, you know, sometimes we can't even handle raw because we don't have very robust digestive tracts. So we want to stay away from the overly cooked foods because they contain what's called AGEs, or advanced glycation end products. These are the compounds that zap our vitality. So the more crusty, burnt, brown, overcooked foods are, the more that these cause inflammation in the body. That's really the takeaway. Now, this is really interesting because there are certain ways to prepare food to maximize the protective vital components within food. And what I would say, just the shortcut answer here, is typically when we're looking at plant foods, steaming foods is usually the best option. And you know, for me, I use my eyes, and so I look for when that food turns a bright color, right? Like broccoli turning bright green, carrots turning bright orange. And so having that steam, even asparagus, I cooked asparagus the other night, and that also turns a brighter green. But if you overcook it, what happens? It's pretty obvious. It gets very dull green, it gets kind of soggy, and it doesn't look very vital. You want to look like your food. You want to look vital, right? So that's your indicator right there. So there are lots of different ways to prepare foods, but what I'm going to say, just to shortcut it all, again, is having that steaming, watching it, watching the color is going to be really important. And in some cases, you need a little bit of healthy fat together with your plant foods in order to help you absorb some of those nutrients. All right, the green. So now we start talking more about vegetables. Well, we have been talking about vegetables, but the green variety. So things like, and I know one cardiovascular surgeon, what he recommends to his patients is to get one of those 5-ounce bags of greens a day, and he always says to them, it doesn't matter how you get them. You can steam them down, you can eat them as salad, you can cook them up, however you want to get them, but make sure you get your greens. And there are so many options for greens, right? If we think of fruits and vegetables. The greens contain all kinds of protective compounds, really and truly. I mean, even something as basic as chlorophyll binds a lot of toxins and carries them out of the body, and can help us to reduce our body odor as well because of the ability it has to bind. So going with the greens can help from a number of different perspectives, even with our hormones, and when we get older and we're not feeling so beautiful because our estrogen is changing, our progesterone is going down. Some of these greens can really help our hormones to get back into balance. So this is where sometimes I like to use a combination of raw and cooked. You know, like the leafy greens. Well, obviously I wouldn't, you know, I might want to have some cooling raw salads every now and then. I do like to cook my broccoli, however, steaming that until it gets that bright green. There's a lot in the way of the cruciferous vegetables to choose from here, and I would definitely call these vitality beauty foods. They change our liver function dramatically. Green tea. If you look at what people, centenarians in Asia, are consuming, they're drinking green tea. Green tea is phenomenal for working on our liver, helping to cleanse us, gives us protection through the antioxidants it contains. Extra virgin olive oil, absolutely. There are so many studies, and notice that I'm saying extra virgin in front of olive oil. So this is, you want the very pure olive oil that hasn't gone through a lot of processing. So you have to find that on the label when you're buying it, and it's pretty easy to find, but definitely lots of protective compounds. Collard greens, I think, are great because they're doing so much there in terms of, again, helping the liver and helping us to detoxify. Kale, I think we're on a kale kick in the U.S. at least. You know, just people are really getting turned on to kale, which I think is great, although I think it's also good to, again, get some variety here, like the collard greens. But when it comes to the skin, and if we're thinking of beauty and vitality, a lot of these compounds in these leafy greens, they make their way into the skin, into the epidermis, to protect the skin. And if you're like me, where you have light skin, it's so important to make sure that you're getting your greens to it's like an internal sunscreen, so to speak, where you have these protective compounds embedded in the skin, and they also change the moisture level of the skin. According to this study, when you're, in this study in particular, they were taking a supplement of lutein, which is the yellow compound that you find within the green leafy vegetables. We also know that lutein, this compound, which you find a lot in kale and parsley and spinach, that it can help to protect you against macular degeneration, where you lose your frontal vision. So making sure that you get sufficient amounts of that. So there are lots of different foods that contain lutein, and I did mention a number of them already. So I'll just name kind of the top list here. So basil. I don't know if any of you have thought about basil, but using basil as a spice, using it as a leaf and just peeling off the basil. You can even grow this in your kitchen as an herb garden. So easy to grow basil. Parsley is another one. In fact, I think parsley is the next kale. The levels of lutein in parsley are even a little bit higher than that of kale. So parsley has a lot of medicinal benefit that I don't think have really seen the light of day. I don't think we've really explored a lot around parsley. We're still stuck in our kale phase, which is okay. Kale's a good thing. We just may want to shake it up a bit. And I did mention spinach before. Avocado is incredible for helping with beauty, and it's because of the fiber that it contains, the fats that it contains, and even there are things in avocado called plant sterols. Plant sterols help with our immune system and help our cardiovascular system. And even in this study in particular, they had people consume half of an avocado together with a hamburger, and they showed that compared to having the hamburger alone, adding the half of an avocado helped to reduce the inflammation that they would see by consuming the hamburger. Bitter foods are also something you're going to want to pay attention to. So things like arugula, bitter greens, the green tea that I mentioned. It seems as though these bitter compounds are also associated with vitality and aging. Flavonoids are another compound of phytonutrients, and essentially what we see, and flavonoids are contained all throughout the plant kingdom. There's no one great big source of them. They're kind of sprinkled through, but you do find a lot of them in tea. And what you see in the studies is that you can help to reduce dementia and cognitive decline by getting adequate amounts of these flavonoids in our eating. So if we want the top flavonoid-containing foods, I would say green tea is right there. In fact, 1 cup of green tea a day, this is a separate issue now, but 1 cup of green tea a day has been shown to reduce cancer by 50% in one particular study I can recall. I mean, green tea is just great for so many things. I have a friend who does not like green tea. So she's been trying to figure out creative ways that she can get green tea. So one of the things that she did was she steeped her green tea, made it really strong, so it's very medicinal, and then she used that as the base for her smoothie. So she doesn't taste it because she's got a bunch of other stuff in her smoothie, so now she doesn't have to worry about tasting the green tea. Me, on the other hand, I love the taste of green tea, so I can sip it all day, and it's wonderful. Add lemon to your green tea. You can help to preserve and potentiate a lot of the good actives in green tea by adding lemon. There's a synergistic effect there. So as you can see, parsley is on this list, oregano, elderberry, and one of my favorites, cacao beans. All right, let's talk a little bit about sea plants and soups and how much we take in through our throat and our mouth. This is also very important for aging and beauty. You know, there's this whole idea of hormesis, and to describe that very briefly, it basically means that we need subtle stress signals, but not too much stress to keep us healthy. So what does that mean? That means, you know, maybe eating a little more frequently versus one big meal with lots of food that inundate us and cause a lot of stress and body burden. So there's this whole idea of really starting to think about how much food we're taking in. And I think in general, people take in a lot of food. And if you look at, just in general, you go to restaurants, the plates are big, the silverware is big, everything is big, the servings are large. People have a perception that, they want to get their money's worth, and so they equate that with more food rather than quality of food. But there have been studies showing, and this is a monkey study that you're seeing on the screen here, in 2009 this was published, essentially showing that the monkey that was able to eat as much as he wanted aged faster than the other monkey who was restricted in the amount of calories that he took in. And that was controlled in a laboratory setting, right? So look at how vital, the hair color, the amount of hair, his stature. And so all kinds of people in different places are really taking on trying out calorie restrictions. So there are many different ways to reduce the amount of calories. We can reduce the amount of food. I think my favorite approach, based on all of the practitioners I talked with, especially when it comes to vitality and making sure that you're not too overwhelmed, is to do what's called the 12-hour nighttime fast, which means, let's just say you stop eating at 7. This is kind of my routine. Stop eating at 7, and it doesn't mean that I do this all the time. I'm not perfect. You stop at that time, and then you don't eat again until 7 in the morning. So that's 12 hours. And so, and in some cases, people like Terry Walls, she would tell you 12 to 16 hours. So you give your mitochondria a break. You allow your cells to recoup and recover and get rid of that debris. It's a very anti-aging process. Helps you to really just feel better. Now, if you're diabetic, and again, you want to talk with your practitioner about anything that you're hearing that might be intriguing before you try it out. And if you're diabetic, you might have to watch your blood sugar. You might become hypoglycemic if you're not eating on a more regular basis. Although some of the practitioners I talk with seem to think that that having a little bit of fasting and trying that out could also help blood sugar. It just kind of depends on what kind of diabetic you are and what state you're in. So, definitely to talk with your practitioner about that, but typically that's not advised. All right, so how we eat, our food ruts, and are we being attentive? How do we just shake things up and get vitality in our food choices? All right, insight. This is where we get into the blue-purple foods, and there are many blue-purple foods, and I would say that this is the color that people get the least of, unfortunately. And maybe that's because there aren't a lot of choices, although I think that they're increasing. We are seeing more in the way of things like purple potatoes, purple cauliflower, even purple kale. So we're seeing the varieties that are out there. It's just a conscious effort that we have to make to select them, to try them out. Berries, what we know about berries, blueberries, blackberries, even strawberries, which aren't necessarily blue-purple, but still belong to this very intense berry category. We see that they can help with brain function, help to reduce inflammation, and help the cells to work better in the brain. And even how the nerve cells talk to one another can be improved. So I do try to aim for some blue-purple foods. When we look at the compounds that are in blue-purple foods, we call these proanthocyanidins. There are other foods that aren't blue-purple that contain these, things like cocoa beans. Cocoa in and of itself, and notice I'm not saying chocolate, I'm saying cocoa. Cocoa by itself is incredible when it comes to allowing our blood vessels to open up and expand and really give us that sense of flow and vitality. So then what I would like to close on tonight is a sense of cleaning the body, cleansing, detoxification. This is really becoming a big issue these days. I'm doing a whole thing called the Detox Summit, which I hope you will sign up for. Because I've interviewed dozens of experts now, all saying the same thing, that our planet is becoming more toxic. So what do you do about it? And so they've given lots of guidance as to how we can improve our food, improve our air, improve our water, and also what are the toxins that we have in relationships, in our thoughts, in our emotions. How do we cleanse overall, because that's going to make us feel much more beautiful. It's going to give us that sense of vitality when we cut the cords of toxins. So there are lots of different foods to focus on for beauty. I've gone through a lot of different ones. The main key takeaway here is to focus on color and making sure that you're steaming, that you're getting good healthy amounts of food, not overdoing it. This is very, very important. I'm hearing this more and more from practitioners, especially as I'm interviewing them for the Detox Summit. It's coming up. So if you do want to register for the Detox Summit, you can do so at www.thedetoxsummit.com, and you'll get more. It's free. You know, it's just an informational summit where you can get more information about staying clean, which is going to be really important, again, for helping the processes of aging, of vitality, and of beauty. So I'd like to thank you all for being part of this, this webinar this evening, and hope you've enjoyed the information, and hope to connect with you. You can find me at my website, www.foodandspirit.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.